now have a keynote address by Mr. Amitabh Kant, Secretary of the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, who we all know is the real man behind the Make in India programs.
The President of FICCI, Mrs. Jyotsna Suri, His Excellency Mr. Yu Cheng, the Ambassador of People's Republic of China to India, an ambassador who's always smiling, and he brings a lot of warmth from China for India. Very, very popular ambassador in India. Mr. Didar Singh, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here on this conference on China-India economic relations, and I'm delighted to deliver the keynote address. Last month I was in China, during this visit of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has had a very, very successful visit to China, and he was received by His Excellency Mr. Xi Jinping, the President of the People's Republic of China, in his own hometown, exactly like Mr. Modi had received him in Vadnagar, his hometown. And there was a lot of warmth, and there's a lot of political will now to take India-China economic relationship to another level and another height, and to impart a lot of dynamism, a lot of momentum to this economic relationship. So the two sides have really resolved to provide momentum to the investment projects, and I think it's important to really push this economic relationship. The Prime Minister had also, on 16th of May, met all the top CEOs of China. And that meeting had almost all the top CEOs of China, some of them very, very distinguished, very leading Chinese CEO. And actually, the Prime Minister had invited some of them. He had announced e-visa, and he said, you should use this and become the first people to come to India. Now, the important thing is that the Chinese don't think small. When you talked about 5 industrial parks, it just shows the ambitious spirit of Chinese and Chinese entrepreneurs. They think in terms of size, they think in terms of scale, they think big, and they think large. And I think that is something which we in India must learn from the Chinese, their ability to think big and their ability to think large and execute it speedily. And therefore, the Prime Minister told him yesterday that whatever you do, your first project must get completed before 2017 end. And Mr. Wang Jinlin took that challenge, and he said he will complete the project. So he's working on war footing. I think Mr. Jack Ma of Alibaba has already made 2-3 trips here, and he is a person who's made remarkable breakthrough in the world of e-commerce, and actually he's demonstrated that using technology, how the Chinese have leapfrogged in the world of retail, and they've bypassed the process of brick and mortar. And therefore, Mr. Jack Ma is looking at various opportunities in India, and he's working with some Indian partners, but he's looking at a huge market because, as they all say, that China has grown rapidly at 10% plus from 1975 onwards. If you grow at 10% plus, then you double your income in 7 years' time, and the power of compounding is enormous. But they've grown enormously at this speed till 2014. Now, you cannot keep growing endlessly, and therefore the Chinese growth rate has reached a particular level. It's like human beings. You can't grow beyond 6.2 or something. And therefore, economists haven't invented this philosophy that you've grown at 6.2, what do? You cannot keep growing to 9 feet, 10 feet. So they're stabilizing at that rate. They're stabilizing at that rate, whereas in India, we are beginning on that growth trajectory. And it's important that India grows at those rates for the next 3 decades or more. And it's necessary for India to grow at those rates because India is a very young population. Its demographics, if 72% of your population is below the age of 30, globally it is seen that it's the baby boomers, as they call it, the young population which drives the growth. There's very low dependency features. And therefore, this young population is very ambitious, it's aspirational, and it'll drive India's growth. And the challenge for India is to grow at those rates of 10% plus for the 3 decades or more. Now, we must understand that the Chinese economy has created large capacities. Because they thought in terms of size and scale, they've created large capacities. And they grew on the model of export-led growth. They penetrated global markets, large-scale production, mass production, penetrate global markets, create some of the best ports in the world, and containerize them and push them into the global markets. And therefore, they achieved this penetration, global penetration. And that was a remarkable growth story of China. There's something to be admired. But the global economy is slowing down, and the global economy across America, across Europe has slowed down. Now, if you were to look at the trade and economic relations between India, now this trade relations between India and China were as low as just 3 billion in 2000. It's reached about 66 billion in 2013-14. 66 billion, from 3 billion in 2000 to 66 billion in 2013-14. However, there's a huge trade deficit. India's exports to China are about US $14.8 billion, whereas imports from China are about 51 billion. 51 billion imports, 14.8 billion exports. Now, to my mind, there's a huge trade deficit, and this trade deficit with China is not sustainable over a long period of time. It is not sustainable because a lot of this is non-essential imports. And over a long period of time, there's pressure because in India also, you have to create jobs, you have to manufacture. And therefore, this whole philosophy of Make in India to create manufacturing, create jobs for a young population. But if you were to look at investments coming in from China, from April to January 2015, April 2000 to January 2015, they are to the tune of only 610 million. And the Chinese investments into India are just 0.25%, just 0.25% of the total investments which has come into India. And therefore, you know, this relationship which has grown and prospered has grown and prospered on the basis of a huge trade deficit with China. And to my mind, this is not sustainable in the long run. And I want to be frank about it, that this will not survive. This relationship in economic terms will not survive. It will not grow. It will not flourish over a long period of time till this trade imbalance is not corrected. And the way to do this is that China, which has created very large capacities, actually was penetrating global markets, will find it very difficult to penetrate global markets. But India provides that vast demand. India provides that vast demand. And it's important for Chinese to, instead of exporting to India, looking at manufacturing in India and actually meeting the Indian domestic demand by manufacturing in India. And I think this is the time to leverage the broad industrial bases of both India and China, the resource endowments for competitive advantage. And this is the time really for Chinese enterprises to invest in India. And to my mind, the philosophy should be really to invest it by China and made in India. So the Chinese companies seriously need to look at India as a market, as a very vast market, but look at it in terms of manufacturing in India. And really, the Chinese investments must flow into manufacturing and relocating some of their very vast facilities in China. And I've traveled extensively in China. I've seen some of the best manufacturing in And, I've greatly admired China for two things. One, its ability to create world-class infrastructure at very rapid pace. And to my mind, you can't be a first-class country till you don't create world-class infrastructure. And the challenge for India is that there's a huge imbalance in terms of infrastructure. And the Chinese companies have that ability to create infrastructure, quick infrastructure. Secondly, today, China has liquidity. It has vast amount of liquidity, and therefore its Chinese banks are able to finance the Chinese companies to execute projects quickly. And therefore, I think infrastructure sector, which requires long-term funds, are something which the Chinese companies can bring in. And I think India needs to quickly look at this aspect of both infrastructure projects being executed by Chinese companies, infrastructure financing being done by Chinese banks. India needs to look at manufacturing by Chinese companies by relocating here. And, actually, in many ways, China and India complement each other in many ways because the two countries' economic models are very different. China's economic growth relies mainly on exports. It's been an export-led economy, while India's economic growth has relied primarily on domestic demand. China's development is largely attributed to relatively high rates of investment, development of labor-intensive industries, substantial foreign direct investments, and an export-oriented development model. India's focus has been more on service industry and technological innovation, and primarily adopts a consumption-based growth model for economic development that has relied on domestic demand. So, to my mind, while China has been the factory of the world, India has been the back office of the world. And both this factory of the world and the back office of the world today can be leveraged to stabilize the supply of the global production chain and to reduce risks arising from global economic fluctuation. And this could lead to improvement of international competitiveness of the Chinese and Indian enterprises in the international market. The other thing which I've admired about China is the ability to do really good engineering and manufacturing. Some of their companies have done remarkable work in terms of engineering, and some of their companies have done remarkable work in terms of planning and design. And one of the key things is the ability to create new industrial townships. And Suzhou, Wuxi, Lingang, some of these places which I've traveled to, Shenzhen, these are remarkable achievements in terms of creating top-class industrial townships. And therefore, not merely industrial townships, but townships with residential areas, townships with very well-connected transport networks, townships with very good drainage, sewage. It's a growth which is phenomenal in nature. If you look at this, Dalian Wanda's whole achievement, how did it grow in 1988? This guy, Wang Jianlin, actually joined the People's Liberation Army at the age of 15. He served in the army for 17 years. He's the richest man in Asia today. After serving for 17 years, he said in today's world, it is better to be a businessman than to be a general in Chinese army. He said there's no point being a general in the Chinese army, so he resigned. And then he joined the bureaucracy in Dalian. He became a government officer. He worked for 1 year and he said this is too bureaucratic. There's no point being a bureaucrat in Dalian, so he resigned from there and he started this Dalian Wanda group. And, 100 billion from 1988 till now, richest man in Asia. And how did he start it? He started it in Dalian, they were doing slum redevelopment. So he took up this project, and there was a time when Chinese houses did not have bathrooms. They did not have toilets. So he started redeveloping the slum area, and he created a toilet. He built houses with toilets in Dalian. And because for the first time the Chinese were seeing in slum areas, houses with toilets, he made minted money out of that. Everything got sold, he made money, and that's how he grew. Imagine a guy who owns hundreds, he owns about 100 or 5-star hotels. He owns, Wanda Plazas, hundreds of Wanda Plaza, 1,200 cinema halls. He owns 840 karaoke bars. I mean, this is the size and scale. So this is all, he's grown into all this from one single thing, making toilets in a slum development area. So this is the leap which China has made from 88 till now. And I think it's a remarkable lesson for India that what you can do in 2 to 3 decades. It's very important that as far as India is concerned, that China really gives a thrust in India to the production of hardware, while India focuses on software services and biopharmaceutical research and development. The complementarity of the industrial development models of the two countries provides ample room for expanding investment cooperation between the two. China and India enterprises can carry out technology or efficiency-seeking investment, form strategic alliances in terms of software development, cooperate in hardware equipment production, and invest in each other for common research development and manufacturing. India today has a very dynamic economy. It is recognized as a leader amongst the developing countries with a huge growth prospect. It is ranked as one of the most attractive investment destinations, and actually its growth rate is today at 7.4%, and it will continue to grow. Our FDI has grown at about, since the launch of the Make in India campaign, has grown at about almost 36%. We've opened up all the sectors, defense, railways, we've opened up construction, we've opened up medical devices, insurance, pension funds, everything. So other than multi-brand retail, India is the most open economy of the world. And India, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, in front of the Chinese ambassador, that India is a far more open economy of the world than China is. So, for China, we'll make it more open. So the Chinese must come in and invest in India into vast number of areas, from construction to railways to manufacturing. All these are areas where China must come in. Instead of exporting from China, which is not sustainable, they must get in and actually demonstrate that you can. And as I told Mr. Wang Jianlin, that if he has created 100 billion in China from 1988 to 2014, it has taken him actually 26 years to create 100 billion. When China was growing, and therefore, but in India's context, he can create 100 billion in just 10 years' time. So the growth, their ability to create 100 billion in India will be much quicker, much faster, because of the sheer aspirational spirit and the dynamism of India. So we are looking at pursuing these industrial parks. We are pursuing this growth model of a vast number of Chinese coming into India. Their ability to create vast industrial townships. We have tried to make India, one of the key things is that Chinese investors have found India a difficult place to do business in. And that's the challenge which India has, that India must make itself a very, very easy and a very simple place to do business. And we must act as their facilitators and catalysts. We must support them to invest in India. And therefore, one of the key things this government has done is really to scrap a number of procedures, paperwork, rules, regulation, acts, all that we've been at it. And our challenge is to make India a very easy place to do business, not for World Bank's sake, but for India's sake. For India's sake, we must become a very easy place, because only if you are easy, you can create wealth. You can create Jack Ma's, you can create Wang Jianlin, only if you become very easy to do business. And I think that's the challenge which Indians have. We must break all rules, regulation, procedures to make India a very easy place, so that investors, not merely from China, but all across the world, and investors from India and our own young entrepreneurs can grow, prosper with their startups and become rich, wealthy Indians. And that in the next 3 decades, while all of us are here, we are able to create thousands and thousands of young Indian, much like we are seeing the growth of Flipkart or Snapdeal. These are all young Indian startups who are taking on the Amazons of the world. So I think there's a huge opportunity. There's a huge opportunity, not merely in yoga computers, not merely in e-commerce, not merely in this thing, as, when I was Secretary Tourism in Kerala, I'd gone to Bangalore once, and my batchmate was the Secretary of Information Technology in Karnataka. And Bangalore was known world over as the IT capital of the world. So a team, big team, you know, and when Chinese travel, they travel in large numbers. So big team came from Chengdu. And they said, we want to make Chengdu the IT capital of the world in China. And they were setting up a big IT park, and they said, so they came, and this IT secretary hosted a big dinner for them. Hundreds of Chinese, about 100 odd Chinese, big, lovely, lavish dinner was hosted for them. Wonderful dinner was hosted. And then after the dinner was over, this governor of Chengdu asked this IT secretary that, oh, wonderful food, lovely food. What cuisine was this? So this IT secretary told him, sir, this was Chinese food. This Chinese food. This is Indian version of Chinese. So this, the governor of Chengdu then called this. He said, please, I've never had such Chinese ever in my life. So he said, this is Indian Chinese. So he said, call the chef. So they called the chef. And this governor said that, well, we are trying to attract Indian IT companies to come to Chengdu, and we are inviting, many Indians to come to Chengdu to set up their IT companies. So we invite you to come to Chengdu, and we'll give you a place to set up a restaurant. And that chef went to Chengdu, and today is running 6 restaurants in China. So that was the Indian version of Chinese, you know. So the Indian version of Chinese is taking on China, and probably will change the taste of Chinese themselves. The taste of Chinese. And, you know, just last week, this Indian film PK with Amir Khan has actually done 100 crores worth of business. It has done more business in China than what it has done across the world. So the Chinese have loved that film, Amir Khan's film called PK. It has been a resounding success. And you'll see much more of the soft power of India through yoga, through cuisine, through films penetrating the Chinese mind. And you'll see much more of the Chinese hard power penetrating India through investments and manufacturing in India. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.